Hello again, everybody. This is Derek, and I am coming back at you with another wargaming and miniature video. In this video, we're going to start a brand new series. We're going to be starting the Land of the Free, and we're going to be doing the boot camp, okay, for this American War of Independence, actually early black powder rule set. It goes from 1754, which would be the Indian Wars, up to 1815, which is the Napoleonic period. But it focuses on like the French and Indian War, the American War of Independence, and 1812. It doesn't really touch on Napoleon, and it doesn't really, it barely touches on the early war stuff. So it focuses, or at least I focus right there on the middle. This is a rule set by Joe Crone. It's published through Osprey. This is the hardback version. On the Osprey site, you can pick up this set of rules in PDF form. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting screenshots up here when I get to a certain area in the rules where I need to show a chart or any kind of text or whatever, maps, pictures, whatever. If you've ever been to any of my boot camps, you know that I read from the book, right? And it's not for everybody. Some people don't want me to read from the book. They want me to give you my abbreviated version of the rules, where I don't want to do that. I'm going to give you a comprehensive view of what these rules are. I might skip a few paragraphs. I might jump to certain areas, but overall, I'm going to go over every rule, and you're going to be able to learn these rules by watching this video. I strongly recommend going to the Osprey site, picking up the PDF, and then you can follow along with me. In this first introductory video, I'm going to be sitting at my computer where I'm at right now, and we're going to be going over the introduction. In future videos, we're going to be focusing on chapters in the book. Like we might talk about movement in one, we might talk about command in another, we might talk about shooting in one, melee in another, and I will do all of those on the battlefield. Okay, I will have miniatures set up, terrain, we'll roll some dice, and I'll show you exactly what they mean by certain rules. Now this is kind of a double-edged sword. Or you could call it like a sword and a shield. Sword and board. What I'm doing is I'm going over the rules in minute detail for you, but it's not just for you. It's also for me, because I've read these rules 3 or 4 times, maybe more. But I find that when I do these boot camps, like the Black Powder Boot Camp or the Bolt Action Boot Camp or any other boot camps that I might have done, O group, what have you, I learn something during the boot camp. So it's almost like I learn by doing. And hopefully you can learn along with me. Now, if you have any trouble with audio or anything, just let me know in the comments, and I'll see if I can't adjust it for the next video. Okay, there is a table of contents in the very beginning. We've got, and I'll tell you the main chapters. We got the introduction, which we'll go over. We got organizing your forces. Then we have elements. which you could say maneuver element, or you could say unit, battalion. You know, that's an element, or squadron, I guess, for cavalry. And then you got, or battery for artillery. And then he goes to orders, then commanders, which I'll probably lump that into one video. And then the game turn. The game turn will probably be at the end of the orders and commanders video because it's fairly straightforward. Then we go into shooting combat, melee combat. Okay, turning the page. Discipline and morale. Scenery. Okay, now scenery isn't just pretty on the table. It actually will impede your movement, your shooting, it'll give you cover, that kind of stuff. So scenery is terrain, you know. Then there are advanced rules, which I feel that you can't really play this game without the advanced rules. You probably could, but the advanced rules give each time period and each unit or element a unique feel. So without the advanced rules, everything is vanilla. Okay. Then the majority of the rest of the book, that's 100 and... Okay, there's 96 pages of rules, and then it goes up to 109 for optional rules and advanced rules. The scenarios start at 112, and that goes all the way to the end of the book where you have the quick reference charts. So really, there's only about 112 pages of rules, and that is that's awesome. That's great. All right, the author's note. Basically, it says, "Welcome to Land of the Free. The purpose of this book is to offer you an opportunity to walk in the shoes of the military commander during one of the most tumultuous and influential times in American history. The rules are designed to represent the type of warfare that was fought in the late 18th and early 19th centuries without sacrificing efficient and joyful gameplay." See, he believes in the same philosophy that I do, and that is fast, fun, and playable. He's confident that you'll enjoy these rules. I'm pretty confident as well, as the rules are simply divided into the core mechanics. And once you have a comprehension of the main rules, you can add advanced rules. Basically, he's saying that that's a note from Joseph Crone talking about himself and why he got into this project, which I think he did an excellent job. And Osprey did a good job of publishing it. Okay, so chapter 1, or not even chapter 1, it's the introduction. I'm calling it chapter 1. The game has a tremendous amount of flexibility. You can do small skirmishes to large engagements. Okay, the scenarios in the book have the Indian War, the American Revolutionary War, the Northwest Indian War, the War of 1812. Oh, I'm sorry, the French and Indian War. Okay. And then it goes into a history lesson telling you a little bit about the time period, which I'm going to glaze over. And we're going to talk about essential items. 9 out of 10 of you already know what the first one is. You need an opponent. Well, that's not really true. You can play solitaire. You can have many players on a side if you want. And it doesn't need to be evenly matched as long as the players agree. Basically, he's giving you permission to play how you want to play. You can play with a referee. That way you can avoid the meticulous scenario descriptions. You can let them play, and then if something turns up, then the referee can implement it. Okay, so you need your opponent, which can be yourself. And then you need a tabletop or a playing surface. Jokingly, he says miniatures need a miniature battlefield, and it's dependent on the amount of figures you want to play with. For smaller scale miniatures or smaller battles, a 4x4 table is just fine. A 4x4, that's pretty small. And that would be for your 6mm or your 15mm figures, right? You can play this game in any scale. He has rules in here specifically for 15s or smaller, 25 28s, and 40mm. For larger games, you should consider using a 4x6. That's about your standard Warhammer size battlefield, your standard bolt action, or a 4x8, which is a sheet of plywood. There's no right or wrong answer. Battlefields can vary in size depending on the scenario or your playing space as well. Some people can play on dinner tables, billiard tables, tennis tables, the living room floor. But most likely your local hobby shop has miniature tables that you can use. Okay, scenery. Well, you don't want to play just on a sheet of plywood. It looks fantastic when populated with some gaming mat. I have a blanket that's made out of something like flannel. It's a very short pile, but it kind of gives you the impression that it's grassy, and that's what I play on. And you'll want to represent the landscape. And he's saying, you can get a vinyl or felt mat. You want it to be green or brown in color because you want it to be a generic terrain color. And there's a lot of companies out there that make those, but you can also make your own. Fake fur, teddy bear fur, cloth, and even paper, he says. When thinking of North American countryside, you think of rolling hills, thick forests, endless rolls of snake rail fencing, and fields of corn or wheat. And there's plentiful manufacturers that make those if you don't want to make those yourself. The next thing he recommends, or it's kind of an option, range rulers. You really only need to represent 1, 3, 6, 9, and 12-inch increments. So if you get a 12-inch dowel rod and you mark it at 1, 3, 6, 9, and 12, you'll have all the movements that you need for all your units. You might not have all the shooting ranges because cannons fire a little bit further, so you might want to have a tape measure available. You can use straight rulers. Just remember that, you'll be using 1, 3, 6, 9, or 12. You may use the metric system, but for the purposes of this book, all ranges are referred to in inches. They say your tape measure should extend out to 48 inches. That would be helpful for artillery. Okay, you're going to need dice. This is a D6 game. 1d6, 2d6, 3d6, etc. But there is occasionally a time where you need to roll a d3. And you can still use a d6 to represent a d3. 1 or 2, it counts as a 1. A 3 or 4 counts as a 2. And a 5 or a 6 counts as a 3. or you can get specially made D3s. You might also want different colored dice for different types of rolls or keeping track of elements' orders during their activation. It'll make more sense once we get further into the book. Okay. Game markers. Okay. There is a company out there, Ironheart Artisans. Ironheart Artisans designed a comprehensive set of markers for Land of the Free. So you can go look that up. But there are certain conditions in the game that you have to keep track of. Now, FYI, you can make every one of these out of cardboard, or you can get some bases, a bunch of round bases of different sizes. You can write on them. You can color code them with paint. You can do whatever you need to do. But there are certain things you need to mark. So there's different ways to keep track of that. Because the battlefield is consistently changing, you may want to use an army list, a piece of paper, or tokens to keep track of the ebb and flow of the game. Different ways you can represent gaming markers, such as plastic tokens, cotton, pipe cleaners, poker chips, painted miniatures. In the past, I have used different colored pipe cleaners to represent like disordered or routed, when a unit is disordered or routed. Now, I would have also a different color when they have used their first fire. And I would use another color when cavalry goes on react, or something like that, usually yellow. You can use whatever you want. In this game, I plan to use cotton balls stretched out in front of a battalion to represent when it is fired. I plan to use glass beads and rings. I have these casualty caps, and I have rings, and I have glass beads, and I have pin markers. I'm not exactly sure which ones I'm going to need to use. I have a bunch of wooden blocks in different colors from Napoleon's battles. I have, white, black, blue, green, yellow, red, purple even. So I could use those different colors to represent certain things. And that little wooden block, it's like 3 millimeters square. So it's very small on the battlefield. It won't be very intrusive. A big, huge pin marker might be intrusive. A giant glass bead, or if you're collecting glass beads behind your unit to represent casualties, that might be distracting. All right, in this next section, we're going to be talking about organizing your forces and choosing a war or background. Without going too deep into it, you don't want to pick the French and Indian War and then start collecting miniatures for the War of 1812. You're not, well, unless you're a masochist, you're not going to want to pick the American War of Independence if you're planning on doing the 7 Years' War, because a lot of the uniforms would be different, and those have different, the units looked a lot different. So what they're saying is pick one of the wars, French and Indian War, American War of Independence, 1812, whatever you plan to do, and then work from there. It has 4 fantastic wars to take part in. First, determine the war or wars you want to play. French and Indian War, American Revolutionary War, Northwest Indian War, and the War of 1812. That way you can, players, you and your opponents, will have like a centralized theme where you can discuss and you can research. You can look at scenarios, battles that took place. Yeah, you can look at Pontiac's Rebellion. That would be a good one. Or the Creek War. Of course, you don't need a historical setting because you can play using points and just do like a media engagement or pick one of the generic scenarios in the back. All right, but you do need to pick a scale. You don't want one side to have a bunch of 15 millimeter models and the other side to have 40 millimeter. It just, that's just ridiculous. I personally plan to do 15 millimeter and do all factions so that whenever we play, we can just use my army. It takes a little bit of strain off of some of my friends that might or might not be interested in this period enough to invest in miniatures. Yeah, okay, choosing, when it says pick your scale, they're not just saying the scale of the miniature, they're also saying the scale of the battle. So do you want to play like a small skirmish battle where it's just maybe 100 men on a side? Or are you looking to play a huge battle like, I don't know, Brandywine or something, where there's many units on the table? So if you are the kind of person that wants to play with many units, Joe recommends using smaller figures. That way you can get more of them on the table. But if you're playing with a skirmish size of a game, then there would be nothing wrong with playing with 28 millimeter or even 40 millimeter models. There is no right or wrong answer. Okay, organizing your force. I'm going to put a little chart up here on the screen. Okay, this is the force organization that you'll be using throughout the army building phase. Also, like your scenario building or command and control on the battlefield. You'll notice that at the top of the list, you have what's called a force commander. Joe leaves that deliberately vague because depending on what scale of a battle you're playing, that could be an army general, or it could be a corps commander, it could be a division commander, it could be a lieutenant, just depending on how big your type of game is going to be. So the way most of these scenarios are written in the book, the force commander is typically a division commander. And then under the division or the force commander, you'll have a number of group commanders. Okay, it shows 6. It's 2 in black. You'll see that. Those are obligatory. You have to have a force commander and at least 2 group commanders when you are designing your force. When playing a scenario, it's going to already be that way. But just in the back of your mind, just know that there is a minimum. You're going to be given points. Now your players and you can decide how many points you're going to use. So that'll help you determine how many miniatures you're going to need and how big your force is going to be. So as an example, if you wish to play a 200-point game, both sides will be designed with that total, and you will equal or be below 200 points. But you still have to abide by the rules of building your force. Okay, so a group commander would be the next rank down. So if your force commander is a corps commander, you would expect your group commanders to all be division generals. But because the American War of Independence and most of the battles in this book are not huge Waterloo-sized battles, they're not corps-level engagements usually. It's usually a division commander, the force commander, and each of these group commanders would be brigade commanders or brigadiers. And you can see under force composition in the bottom left, you need one force commander, at least 2 up to 6 group commanders, and then in each group you need between 2 and 6 elements. An element is a unit. That is your group of miniatures that you move around. They shoot and move and do all that jazz. A group, an element, and see, Joe is leaving it deliberately vague so that you can scale it up or down for your personal needs. So if hypothetically, I'm going to go to an extreme. Let's say you're playing a skirmish level game where you're only playing with a handful of models. So your force commander might be the lieutenant that has a platoon he's running in. And your groups might be squads, right? And then in those squads, you're going to need at least 2 halves or fire teams, if you will, or sections in that squad. All right, now in that element, you need to know there are 4 types or 4 sizes of elements. There's tiny, small, medium, and large. And as a organizer or a cooperative play with your buddies, you need to determine ahead of time how many stands are going to represent each element size, right? So a tiny unit might be just 1 base, where a small might be 2 bases, etc. But you have to decide that amongst your play group or amongst yourself if you're playing solo. And it's more important to keep consistency with the stand sizes more so than the number of figures on the base. The number of figures on the base is totally arbitrary. You can decide if you want to have 1 figure on a base or if you want to have 20 figures on a base. But it's the base size that's important. Okay, now when you're building your force, once the scale has been determined, and you want to organize your collection and maybe start making purchases to build your collection, you're going to see terms like force commander, group commander, and element. And they'll be described more in detail later. You have to have 1 force commander, and he is free, so you don't have to spend any points on that. Your group commanders are free, so you don't have to spend any points on those. But remember, for every group commander you have to have or assign to them anywhere between 2 and 6 elements. And the elements, based on how big they are, tiny, small, medium, or large, they'll have different amount of points associated with those. And that's where your points come into. All right, and collecting your force. Because if you don't already have a miniature collection, you'll need to do that. Now, there's one good thing about these rules, that if you already have a collection of American War of Independence or 7 Years' War or whatever you've got, you don't have to rebase them. As long as everybody that's playing the game is using the same basing convention, like if you're using black powder bases, that's fine. just as long as everybody's got the same. So there are some recommended base sizes based on how big the models are, but if you already have them based, don't sweat it. There's different ways that you can decide to collect your force. Some people decide on a specific battle, like me, and then they will collect the force for that battle. Other just pick units that they think will look cool when they paint them. And remember, they're designing a force. In that case, they're not doing a historical refight. What they're doing is they're building an army based on the army list, the points. And if you've got a bunch of players that also want to start collecting, you might decide to get started. You might say, I'm going to play the British, you play the Continentals, and Joe, you play the French or the Hessians or whatever. And that way you only you have a limited amount of figures that you need to collect, basically your own army, because if you're playing against your opponent, you're not going to field the British and the Continentals in your army. So that might help when it comes to finances. And then let's say I collect the Continentals, but you want to play the Continentals, there's no problem. You just use my figures, and then I'll use your figures. So we can just swap it up. But it just avoids two players collecting the same models. Me personally, I'm going to collect everything because I'm a completionist. Okay, now I want to show you some examples of some forces. And these are in pictures. All right, this first example is 150 point, 15 millimeter French and Indian War force consisting of two groups. So you see your force commander in the middle, and you got your two group commanders side by side. And each one has, one has two large elements, and then the second one has three medium-sized elements. Now, throughout this rules and in my games, you'll notice that 5 stands, like the ones on the left, represent a large unit. And 3 stands on the right represent medium-sized units. So we got 2 large Algonquin Indians, and Mookie's group has 2 medium Algonquin Indians and a medium French frontiersman. And the width of the bases are the same, 40 millimeters in this case. But you'll notice that the Indians are on sabots just to represent their skirmish nature, but they're still units, and they still have the same number of bases. All right, you'll see this next force is done a little bit differently. You can see that his force commander has got multiple figures on the base, and you'll notice that force commanders, or all the commanding models, are on round bases. This is a 160 point French and Indian War French force, and it has 3 groups. Jean Baptiste has 2 medium infantry elements. They would be the ones on the far left. And remember, medium elements are 3 bases. And then the far right would be Bonnet, or Bonnet, and he's got 2 medium infantry elements, also both with 3 bases. And then the middle group has a large infantry element French frontiersman, and you can see that there are 5 bases, and a medium artillery element, which you'll see he's got 3 bases. Right, and this last one I want to show you, I skipped a few, but this is a 175.28 millimeter American Revolution force. It has 2 group commanders, 3 large elements, 2 medium elements, and a small element. The force commander, you can't see every element here, or every commander, but the force commander is right there in the middle behind the skirmishers. And then you've got Whitaker, which is in between the 2 large infantry elements. He has the Virginia and the Pennsylvania is his 2 large infantry. And then if you look over on the right, he has a medium artillery element with 3 guns of different calibers, but basically 3 guns. And in front of the force commander, you see the small infantry element, which in this case has 2 bases. Like I plan to do, tiny is 1, small is 2, medium is 3, and then large winds up jumping to 5. But you'll see that Lieutenant Colonel Crane has a large infantry element, which you can't see because it's off camera, but he also has a medium cavalry element, the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons, which is just barely visible on the above the wheat field. The infantry's over here, but yeah, there's 3 bases of cavalry. All right, and so that's the introduction. That was organizing and building your force. That was understanding like what the minimums are for force compositions and basing and things like that. Not really how big the bases are, but how many bases you need. And that can be adjusted based on your play style. If you want a large unit, let's say you play black powder, hypothetically, and all your battalions are set up with 6 bases, and you want a medium-sized element to be 6 bases, go for it. If you want the large to be 8, and if you want small to be 4, and tiny to be 2, that's up to you. But predetermine that before you start building your armies, or at least explain that before you run a game or play a game with your opponent, so they won't be, so everybody will be on the same sheet of music. All right, in the next video, I'm going to take you over to the battlefield, the table over here, and we're going to show you elements, like element sizes, bases, and stands. We're going to talk about the different types of elements. There's only 3: infantry, cavalry, and artillery. We're going to talk about groups, which is the group commander and the force commander. And then we'll talk about statistics, because it depends on the size and what type it is, and what the statistics mean. And then we'll probably also talk about formations, line of sight, arc of fire, and all that, front and flank, how to measure. Yeah, we'll do all of the elements portion, and the video after that will be orders, just to give you like a synopsis. There's 2 orders. You have a maneuver order and a combat order, and they can't be interchanged. And then after that, we'll progress on to other things like shooting and morale and all that stuff, like I said in the beginning. All right, guys. You should be able to expect a video like this probably every 3 or 4 days until I get through the entire book, or at least the first 112 pages. Yeah, 112 is the start of the scenarios. So really, the rules and the advanced rules and the optional rules only go up to 111. All right, I will catch you in the next video.